Now there's Paul who's gonna join me in a few minutes. So for those who don't know, Paul Bettner is been in the industry for a very long time, so more than 20 years. So we work at Microsoft Game Studio. We help on Halo Wars, War, sorry, and Age of Empires as well. And then there's probably a game that you know more, which is Word with Friends that had huge success and propel your company, New Touring Corporation, to the stratosphere. I think most dads and moms out there played your game, which is fantastic. And so I'm so happy to have you here today because there's so much that we can talk about, both
Yeah,
based on your expertise, but where things are going. So that's going to be super interesting.
thank you very much for having me. Just making sure you guys can hear me okay?
Yeah, it's all good. You look great. So that's fantastic.
Excellent. Well,
So
I've been watching for a while, and you have a busy day, obviously, helping with all these panels. I appreciate it.
yeah, definitely. Well, the goal is to share information and and have fun. And obviously, if we were physically there right now, we might have a beer around us because I always like to do fireside chat uh, while being cozy or
I like
panels
that. I
per
like
se.
that we have a little fire in the Zoom. I
Look at
feel
that.
warmer.
I can feel the warmth,
Yeah,
definitely.
exactly.
With winter coming and Halloween soon, the fireplace is going to start cracking.
Yeah.
So Paul,
Yes.
like I was saying, you've been there for a very long time. You saw, many challenges, both in the 90s and early 2000s. The topologies changed, the libraries changed, the medium changed. Then you went mobile, and now going all over the place. So maybe you can tell us a little bit, like obviously, how did it started for you, and
Yeah.
what were the first challenges? And develop on the Age of Empires and
Yeah.
where this thing led afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I've been making games for, I guess, almost 25 years. I was one of those kids that kind of knew what I wanted to do already when I was, 13 or 14. And so I was already programming at that point and really teaching myself. And that was back when it was like right at the beginning of modems. So there was 2400 baud, 9600 baud modems. And I'll never forget my first experience connecting my computer with my brother's computer and playing a game that was a multiplayer game that connected those two things. And I just thought it was the most amazing, magical thing I'd ever experienced. And from that point forward, I wasn't just drawn to games, but I was specifically drawn to network games, multiplayer games. What's interesting, is looking back then and now, it's not. I kind of expected, if you'd asked me then, that some of the challenges would have been solved or would be easier or whatever, but they're not necessarily. I mean, I think that the challenges inherent in building a multiplayer game, are going to probably always be with us because it's a little bit like you were talking about in the last panel. There's this inherent sort of connection between how a game is designed and how it works on the network that I don't think is ever going to go away necessarily. And we always need to be thinking about it. So anyway, back in that time, I wrote an emulator that ran that emulated a LAN network. It's called IPX at the time, over a network of modems, and I sold that. It was called Sir IPX, and it was, if you guys remember BBS's bulletin board systems, I ran one of those in South Florida. It was one of the biggest BBSs. We had 200 phone lines coming into my bedroom. Actually, I had all these. It was kind of insane, but at the time, getting modem lines into an apartment was a lot cheaper than doing it in an office. And so I kind of like hacked the system and got the phone company to install 200 phone lines into my bedroom. And I had all these modems and a huge air conditioning because otherwise I couldn't sleep because it was way too hot with all the hardware in there. Anyway, I did that. We ran, several different games on that software I wrote, Doom and Warcraft, and learned a lot about the challenge of taking a game that was designed for a LAN, because Warcraft, Doom, those games were not designed to run on modems, and figuring out how to get them to think they were running on a very slow LAN when in fact they were running on a network of modems. That work that I did actually helped get my first real job in the industry when I came to Dallas to work for Ensemble Studios and on the Age of Empires franchise. Some of the guys on that team, and I was only 19 turning 20 at the time, and kind of crazy to apply. The studio was just finishing Age of Empires 1 actually when I applied. But some of the guys on their team had actually used that BBS and had used that software that I had written. And so they're like, wait, that was you? You know, you must have written that when you were 17 or whatever. It's like, yeah, I've been, you know, really fascinated by this stuff for a while. And so I joined that team and was there with Ensemble Studios working on Age 1, Age 2, Age 3, Halo Wars, Age of Mythology, and really built the network system. You know, when I joined Mark Toronto, who is actually the founder of Hidden Path Entertainment. So he's gone on to do some amazing stuff. And him and I were the network engineers, and then I took that over from him. And we had this immense challenge of figuring out how to get an RTS with thousands of units moving around, doing all these things to run on, at that time, I think the lowest that we had to target was a 14.4 modem. And, you know, and this is peer-to-peer. So this is like, you know, 14.4 modems connecting over the internet, communicating with each other. And that was a crazy challenge. We built, you know, I think one of the first deterministic lockstep-based networking engines. And what's fascinating is, you know, now right today, I'm actually working with, and I'm a huge fan of Photon, so and of the exit games. So this isn't a commercial. I'm literally just a customer, but I love the stuff that you guys are doing. And I'm working with now the next generation sort of evolution, really many years in the future, of some of those deterministic techniques that we used, which is called Quantum, and is an amazing networking engine by you guys. But anyway, so I was there. I helped build that, and then I also built something called Ensemble Studios Online, which was kind of one of the first sort of like. Well, it's what became Xbox Live, actually. A lot of the technologies that were in that were the things that became what is now known as Xbox Live. And so it was friends lists and you know, identity and presence and all these other technologies that really allowed people to find and matchmake with other people in Age of Empires. So anyway, did that for 10 years, then left that company right about a little bit after when we sold that company to Microsoft. And started a mobile game studio back before anyone thought that was a good idea. I mean, like in hindsight, everybody's like, oh yeah, of course. But I swear, when we went and started to make iPhone games, everybody, all my friends, all my colleagues were like, I think Paul's having a midlife crisis. Why is he going to make games for mobile phones?
Well,
that is the worst
if you first started to make like a BBS and have 200 phone lines going through the room,
yeah,
well, people would know you a bit better. Would have said, well, you know, that's Paul. So
exactly.
He's just want to have fun with communities, right?
It's true. I remember camping out for the Nintendo Wii because I thought that was the coolest thing. And most of my friends are like, nobody's going to buy that. It has like a weird remote control. And I was like, no, but it's so neat and different. So yeah, I've always been that guy. But yeah, so we started New Toy, and we built actually Chess with Friends first, then we built Words with Friends. And that is an asynchronous turn-based game. So, you know, it's built on the same passion that I have of, you know, creating multiplayer games. But that was just so crazy because, you know, when we shipped Age of Empires, we actually thought of the multiplayer as a little bit of like a niche feature. Like we had built this single player campaign for Age of Empires, and we were so proud of it. And then we built multiplayer because that's how we wanted to play. But we didn't really imagine that that would be the way that a lot of people would fall in love with the game. But, you know, it turned out to be the thing I think that still today has led to remasters of Age of Empires and why the game is so popular. So when we built Words of Friends, it was a little scary because it was only multiplayer. And we made this key decision right at the beginning to not build any AI or any single player into that. And our thinking at the time was like, well, we're only a couple of guys. We don't have time to build an AI. So we just have to pick. We're going to pick multiplayer. But it turned out to be one of the most important decisions we made because you can't, you know, when you first launched Words with Friends, there's no way to play it unless you like either hit random matchmake or you go and bug one of your friends to play with you. So the product was inherently viral. Like one person had to go find another person to even play a game. And, you know, it was just this incredible thing. You know, we went from
and it was built on it was built on top of Facebook as well, right?
Yes. Well,
At one point. So back in the days when Facebook came to be popular, notifications and all these things were
yeah.
so much different. So,
In fact, we didn't even have push notifications when we shipped Words with Friends. People had to just launch the app and see if they had a move or not. And we were like hoping, like, oh, I hope that Apple and Google ships this feature. But we kind of believed that they would have to do that. It just made sense to us, and they did. But that was an amazing thing. You know, we went from nothing to 12 million DAU at the peak in like 2 years. And so just trying to keep that game running was like, I mean, I think one time I was up for 72 hours without sleeping, like just because I thought the servers were going to explode. I mean, it was crazy.
so what was your topology regarding Words with Friends, and what were your challenge to make this game scale?
So we, you know, from the very beginning of Words with Friends, because of the fact that we were, you know, a small team, and because of the fact that we didn't really know the kind of challenges we would face, because this was obviously our first mobile game, nobody had built a game like this. What we did is we looked to other technologies that that supported similar kind of user interactions, asynchronous, push-based, and we actually looked at web technologies, and we ended up building a stack based on web technologies, things that are now, you know, kind of well-known WebSockets and those things. But back then they weren't called that, and they were just like, you know, these more raw technologies. But we built it off of HTTP, Ruby. We had a Ruby on Rails server. We used SQL, and then we used basic web communication techniques. And then eventually when we got push notifications, we were able to add that in as kind of an asynchronous real-time connection. But otherwise it was all polling based, which was kind of the nightmare, because, you know,
It was push and pull. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was push and pull. So like when you've got, you know, 100 users logging on, polling the servers, no big deal. When that turns into 1 million, it's a big deal. Like, so we had to write all these front end proxies to, like, you know, just kind of scale out, because we had this core SQL based database that would store all everybody's moves, but accessing that with all these real-time players coming in and trying to push pull from it, we had to write all these like, you know, high performance memory based caches in front of it, so that when the users came in to hit it, they would only hit that instead of actually hitting the database. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of stuff
for those who don't understand, like a push and pull is really a service where if you want to know if there's something that happens on the server, you have to ask the server, did something happen? Did something happen? Well, when you have a socket, usually you have an event that just bubbles up to the client, and that's it. You don't have to ask. So, and then when you're thinking about, you know, server configuration back in the days, every request was intense transaction per se, because you have to validate, did they do something? No. Okay, I'm going to reply no.
That's
exactly, and that creates lots of loads on the architecture overall.
I'll tell you that the thing that saved us there, and this is just kind of a general thing that that I would recommend or kind of offer as advice, the fact that we decided early on to build Words with Friends, the technology, off of existing technologies, is really what saved us, because the kinds of problems that we ran into were the same problems that other websites were running into. You know, high traffic websites like Facebook and Twitter were also push pull. You know, at that time, it's like you would just refresh the page and it had to quickly spit out your timeline, because they didn't really have a, you know, real-time connection stuff at that point. And the fact that we were using those same technologies meant that the breakthroughs that were coming out of, and a lot of these were open source, you know, packages that were coming out of the web browser world and the browser world and the web backend stuff, we were able to take that stuff and use it. So these were things like Redis, which is a real-time memory database, and just front-end caching, so that push-pull that Mark was describing was the same problem that these high-traffic websites were running into. And the fact that we had used the same technology meant that we could not just use that technology, but also that we could reach out to other developers who were already familiar with the technologies we were using, because we hadn't just built it all ourselves from scratch. So
yeah, definitely. And for those that don't know Redis yet, I highly suggest you have a look at it. It's still, I mean, they kept iterating on the product. It's extremely good today. And if you ever want to go into the blockchain world and do high frequency trading and stuff like that, Redis is still top of the line. And but yeah, like back then, if you were making PHP, you ended up with some memory management on top of your SQL. That was the LAMP setup back in the days. And then you had a new database like Membase and Couchbase, and that were all memory based and transactional still. And as Paul said, like and still today, there's games that use SQL as the source of truth. Obviously, things change nowadays. But there's games like, for example, like Eve Online, as far as I remember, it's a huge SQL server farm behind it. So that's why the game sort of like at one point just goes very slow and there's too much thing happening. So yeah, so thinking about those things and how open source things are, it makes things.
I find that oftentimes when I'm talking to other multiplayer developers, there can be a big focus on the real-time component, but a lot of games actually need some sort of persistence also, right? And if you're talking about persisting anything that's shared across the network, you have to start thinking about these things. You have to start thinking about, well, where is my player data stored? Where is my world data stored? How often do I have to update those things? And those become crucial decisions that are as important as what your network protocol is for just players talking to each other.
Yeah, that's right. And if we go back like to the Age of Empire days, also there was not as many players. The challenge was more about making something that is unique, that doesn't exist yet. And obviously you came up with various problems that were not seen before. So my question to you, sir, what is your Zen approach toward like a situation where you're like, okay, I have no clue what's going on, but we have to figure it out.
Well, I really start by working with our game designers to understand what they're trying to achieve. You know, these days I'm running a studio, and so I get the chance to work with lots of engineers who are smarter than me, lots of designers that are smarter than me. And this is kind of what I was talking about. Like what was true 25 years ago is still true today, that there's this crucial connection between what the designers want to achieve and what the director has in mind for the game, and what topology, what network decisions, what things we need to figure out to empower that vision. And it's always a back and forth. It never works if one side is winning and the other side is losing. You know, if the design team is like, I want this, and engineers say it can't happen, but I don't care, just make it happen, that's not going to work. And if the engineers are saying, sorry, designers, you can't have what you want because it has to be like this, and we've already made these decisions about how the network is going to be architected, then that doesn't work either. You know, so I feel like the key is to listen very carefully to, and if you're just a one-person developer, this still applies. Listen to carefully to what the game is trying to achieve. And then once you really understand that, start looking at various technologies that already exist and see if there's something that solves the problem like what you have in mind. Almost always there will be, but it may not be something that is like just packaged up and ready to go. Like here's a network engine that does exactly what you need. You might have to take a part of this thing and a part of this thing and put them together in an interesting way. But it's been my experience. I mean, there have been times, like you're saying, where and it still happens today, of course, where we need to invent something brand new. And in those cases, I try to reach out to other folks and see if there are other people doing similar work somewhere. You know, I recently reconnected with you guys for this reason, because the thing that we're working on now, the top secret brand new Playful project, it's running right into one of the hardest problems still today in multiplayer game development, which is real-time networked physics. You would think that this would be a solved problem, but two players just running a character around, kicking a soccer ball back and forth is exceptionally difficult to get right. I mean, you just saw in the last talk, you know, talking about picking up a leaf can be like a really challenging problem. And so these things are never easy. And they're very much, you know, like the last speaker was saying, like you were talking about, they're very much based on the decisions that the game design wants to make with it. And so a lot of times even if you're using an out of the box networking engine, you still have to be really creative about how you're solving those problems. And so that's what I try to do. I try to I try to be creative, and I try to let the game design push on the network engineering, and also let the network engineering push back on the game design. If the network part of it says this will be really hard, there are lots of clever ways to work around things, like we were hearing in the last talk, even just ways to hide some of the inherent kind of challenges of the network. So in Age of Empires, as an example, because Age of Empires is a deterministic networking engine, and we made that decision, we had to make that decision because every player is talking to every other player, and there's thousands of units. We couldn't possibly transmit the data for every unit moving around in the game all the time. And so what we ended up with was a network engine where the only thing that's sent around is the player inputs and the timing signal. And everything else is deterministically computed, meaning that every computer gets that input and has to compute the same exact simulation on every machine at the same time. And this is fantastic from a networking perspective, because all you have to do is send around the same inputs. But it has one challenge at that time, which was we had no sense of prediction. So when you went to command a unit and say, hey, I have a villager and I want him to move over here, there was an inherent delay before that command was recognized, because that input had to be passed around to all the players, and they all had to acknowledge that command effectively. And then finally it would get back to your machine, and that time would roll forward and you were able to execute that command. So initially this felt bad, because it felt like the villager was not listening to you. Like you would click the mouse, nothing would happen, and then a half second later the villager would start moving. And we said, okay, we got together with the designers, we got together with the artists, even our audio folks on the team, and we said, this is not really something we can solve on the network, because just inherently because of the architecture. But well, what's the real problem here? The real problem is the player's command is not being immediately acknowledged. Would it be okay if we just showed the player that their command was acknowledged, but we didn't move the villager yet? We didn't actually advance the simulation, but we just visually and audio responded to that input. And that's what we ended up doing. And so in Age of Empires, when you click on a unit and you click on the ground to tell them to command, immediately on that player's machine, the villager says, I hear you. And there's this arrow that shows up that's like, oh yeah, you clicked there. But if you watch, the villager doesn't actually, he'll just keep doing what he's doing for a half second, and then finally he'll move over there. But that completely solved the problem. And so this kind of thing you're going to run into it when you're doing network game development all the time. But if you're creative about solving the problem, it doesn't always have to be, oh, we just have to fix that with the network somehow. A lot of times the solution can be around how the player perceives what's happening, not necessarily what's happening.
That's right. It's all about player perception. And then,
yes.
So obviously through all those years, you've probably came with the #1 subject once your community is vibrant and you have a lot of players. It's about cheating.
Yes.
So obviously cheating in Age of Empires, cheating in World with Friends is totally different in various aspect. I guess with Word with Friends, it's about going on Google and typing some words, trying to figure out the letters, which is, it's some stuff you cannot really handle. But then when it's affecting the gameplay per se, like knowing the letter of someone else, what he can write, or in Age of Empires, spawning troops everywhere. And so what were the issue, or like the #1 thing that happened in your games that was, it was very clever hack, and then in general about hacking?
Yeah. So if you go back to Age of Empires, it has a really interesting feature of the network decisions that we made, which we didn't at the time even think about hacking when we were first developing. And unfortunately, this happens a lot. Like I've had many projects I've worked on where the question of, wait, what if players hack or cheat doesn't actually get raised until like the last month of development? And I'm like, oh, dang. And it's kind of too late. And so you see this happen all the time with big games. Like they'll usually in only the first or second patch will they actually address cheating and hacking, because it's like, it just doesn't occur to the team until pretty late in the development. But for Age of Empires, we got really lucky, because the fact that the simulation was deterministic meant that if any player decided that they wanted to cheat and do something like give themselves unlimited resources or something else like that, then all they could do is change that on their one machine, and their machine would immediately desynchronize with every other machine. It would go out of sync. And so they could still like cause the game to end, like, because what it would do is it would crash the game on everybody's machine, say out of sync. But that's not usually what a hacker wants to achieve. They want to like try to cheat at the game. So we were protected against that. However, and so when we shipped the game, by the way, we were like, great, awesome, nobody can cheat in this game, this is great. And it only took like a month before somebody realized, wait a minute, but my machine has all of the data for all the other players in the match, because the way, again, that a deterministic synchronous simulation means that your machine is running the exact same, has all the same data as every other person's machine. And so they're like, why don't I just turn off the fog of war and show all the units on the map and let me see all the resources and everything else? And so that immediately became a problem. Like the hacks that were basically, it was a different kind of hack than you would see in a normal multiplayer game, but it was a, basically see everything and be able to, just kind of look at anyone's village and just kind of go anywhere you wanted on the map. So we addressed in that case some of those things by, it becomes this kind of escalating battle. You're trying to outsmart your hackers, and so you're seeing what they're doing, and then you kind of figure out, well, what could we do to try to combat that? And so what we did in that case is we actually, every once in a while, we would take a look at what your screen was showing, and we would send around something to all the other clients that said, I see this. And if those clients disagreed with what you should be able to see, then it would throw the game out of sync. And we did this in a way that was like, out of syncs are really hard to figure out where and why they're happening. And so like, this was something that stumped the hackers. They were like, well, my turning off the fog of war no longer works, just causes the game to go out of sync. And it was really hard for them to track down why that happened. So every game is different. Like you're saying, in Words with Friends, there's really no way for us to combat dictionary hacks, hacks where people are looking up words. But what we tried to do is design the game so that wouldn't necessarily allow you to win. We knew that would always be a problem. So we actually changed the layout of the board so that playing the biggest word doesn't actually always win the game in Words of Friends. A lot of it is about blocking the other player from being able, like, there's a lot of board strategy around like taking over certain areas of the board compared to like, other games like Scrabble, which don't quite have that. And so that helps, because a great Words of Friends player is not really the one with the biggest vocabulary, as it turns out.
And did you make tournaments with Words with Friends, or you stayed it with a global leaderboard? And because now tournaments are getting more and more popular, obviously.
Yes, yeah. There's so many things that we started to work on. That game is now, we sold that company back in 2012 or something, so it's been a while. And they have introduced new features that have to do with global leaderboards and having real-time tournaments, and yeah, there's a ton of cool stuff there now.
Yeah, definitely. And now with Super Lucky Tail, so I think you made the decision to not make it multiplayer, and then revise it, and but obviously, like, how do you choose to make a game not multiplayer versus multiplayer? Is it really about the game design, or was it for you to make something that was out of your previous games?
So without giving too much away about what we're working on now, the Lucky's Tale franchise is, we kind of have a long-term strategy with this franchise and with the work that we're doing in terms of building our expertise as a studio that can create platforming genre games. Like, we kind of started out and said, some of my absolute favorite game in the entire universe is Super Mario 64, or sorry, just Mario 64. When that game came out, it changed my life. It changed what I thought a video game could be, and it was just incredible. I mean, it just blew my mind. And ever since that day, I wanted to work on a game like that. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, I love multiplayer development and multiplayer games. But we decided that we needed to start off by really just trying to understand and teach ourselves how to start to build a platformer and a game like this that could start to reach the quality of a Nintendo game. And also, we were a very small team initially, so we had to make these hard choices. And so the choice we decided to make was, we're going to focus on building a beloved character. We're going to focus on building an IP that is bright and colorful and the children will love, and just all these things we had never done before. And we were really focused on just getting the character controller. And this actually took us 3 games. Like, it wasn't until New Super Lucky Still, if I'm honest, where we started to really approach the quality that we were hoping for in terms of how the character controls, how the camera works. Like, these really, you know, when you play a game like Mario Odyssey, it can look simple, but God, I mean, it's just the complexity, the nuance of what goes into making one of those games great is just intense. And so you might imagine that we would love to take some of that expertise that we've built in creating platforming games and bring it together with our passion for building multiplayer games. So I would just say, look, you know, stay tuned to the future.
Yeah, that's right. No, KCC, which is what do you call that again? Like, yeah, that's right, for character control. And the various animation on the players, it's super hard, especially when you have physics and you want to make him go up a hill, down the hill, and go in a tight corner.
Yes.
And then when you think about, obviously, having all of that in the multiplayer world, then there's not many ways to do it properly. That's for sure.
I agree.
So I would say, like, what would be like the ideal team structure? Both, like, we've talked a bit about game design earlier. You did give a few tips regarding how to discuss and how to push back as a developer, but sometimes how you have to crunch times and making sure that you can deliver something, right? So how do you manage, like, the your Kanban board, right? For example, like, both regarding before and after the game. So after the game would be, okay, now you have like customer support, and then you have people like complaining about stuff. Then you have the community asking for new features. And then you have this huge crowd that is yelling at you, and sometimes the servers are down. You're like, okay, no, it's okay, it's coming. And so how do you handle input about what needs to be built now?
That's a great question. So there's kind of 2 parts to that question. As you said, there's what you do during development and how you build a great team during development. And then there's how do you handle that once your game is live and launched. So let me take it 2 parts. So firstly, my solution these days to building a multiplayer game that integrates all the various aspects of the team is really to get everyone to understand that we're working together. This isn't silos. This isn't engineering going and doing engineering and design going to design and art going doing art, especially on a multiplayer game, but really on any video game development. There's so much delight and joy and wonder that can be created when those disciplines are working really close together. So what I've tried to do when I'm building a team, like, is find people who are cross-discipline. So this would be a designer who also has a background in engineering, or an artist who's also an engineer, or an engineer who also, understands design or has been a designer in the past. These people are difficult to find, to be honest, in the industry. They would call them unicorns or whatever, but they're crucial because they can speak multiple languages in a way, and they can act as translators between these very different schools of thought and these very different disciplines that need to all function well, when building a game. If you're working as a one-person developer, it's different. And in that case, it's really important actually that you understand at least a little bit about game design, a little bit about art, a little bit, but if you're working in a team, there's nothing more important than those folks speaking together and being able to compromise. And so my solution to that has been to try to find folks who are very empathetic to the other disciplines on the team. They're not just like super focused on their one discipline, but they're willing to listen and to figure out solutions together with people who are working in totally different parts of the game than them, because really that is where the magic happens. There's this example I use on our team all the time, which is Zelda Breath of the Wild. Okay, huge game, amazing what they just one of my favorite games of all time. But you can even see the places where they had to make compromises because doing something would have maybe added another whole category to the Kanban board, to use your example, or added a bunch of new tasks. So they had to make these compromises. And I love when I see those compromises. So the example in Breath of the Wild is when you go to sleep in Breath of the Wild, all they do is they fade to black and they play this little like sleepy song. They don't show the player like have to get down on the ground, because you could be in anywhere where you sleep. You could fall asleep in the forest, you could fall asleep in an inn, you could like, there's all these different places, and they would have had to add all this animation and they would have had to add a ton to the design and animation to make that feature work. And somebody on the team was smart enough or had the foresight to be like, you know what, it would be good enough if we just fade to black and play this sleepy song. It's good enough. And then you just wake up the next day. Those decisions, those things only happen when the different people on the team are communicating well. Then they figure out, like, because otherwise what can happen a lot of times is an engineer or a designer will assume, well, I think design needs this, so I'm going to have to write all this code to support it. And if they would just sit down with the designer and say, what are you really trying to do here? And the designer says, all I really care about is this. And they're like, oh, well, then I can only just do this thing that takes 10 lines of code and it's no big deal. So that's really crucial, is to try to get that communication to happen that way, because it will save so much time and effort and end up the game is much better. So, and then finally, the second point is about the community. We actually do the same thing you guys do, which is we empower our developers to get out there in the community. And I know it takes time. I mean, I always feel bad when I've got Eric or Piotr or something from the Photon team in Discord talking to me about helping me out with some stuff, because I'm like, I know he's got a backlog of 10,000 tasks, and here he is in Discord helping me with my problems. But when we've done the same thing with our developers, and it takes trust, you have to trust that somebody's not going to, that you have a company culture where everybody's going to like be a good person on Discord and not be a jerk. But if you have that, then that connection between developers and the community and the players who are experiencing the game, that's magical. Then the developers all know what the community wants. They know the direction to take the game once it's live. And so, just getting in there and getting together with that community even before you launch is so crucial. And also just realizing that when you're building and launching a multiplayer game, the day that you ship it is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of the journey. So be committed to that, because it's what you do from that point when you launch the game that ends up making it into something that could, be played 10 years from now.
Yeah, definitely. Like, soft skills is often put on the side, and people just look at the resume and, oh, he has this skills. Okay, I'm going to interview that person. But being passionate is definitely one thing, and having multiple hats. And I agree with you. Like, it's super hard to find someone that both understand, for example, how the engine works, and then the networking side, and then the game design regarding the appetite of the gamers and what is possible to be done. It's extremely hard, and in school they don't necessarily teach these things to students as well. They just, okay, be a programmer, be a 3D artist, and then you just learn that little thing. But gaming, now we talk about the metaverse and which replace the world. So okay, so what do you need to replace the world? Well, we need a lot of things. So obviously it's a lot of expertise, and so obviously, like I was saying also in my talk earlier regarding like ISPs and internet service providers and the actual status of internet today. So we do have like super high bandwidth. We do, we have faster connections obviously than in the Age of Empires days, but it doesn't mean anything or almost to multiplayer game, because the network is like internet is just badly built, right? Period. And ISPs are reselling their own bandwidth. Sometimes you will go with one ISP for download, another ISP for upload, after the second hoop of the connection that is happening. So, yeah, my question for you is, what is your overall view on the world state of the internet, and how do you treat, for example, like Asia versus Europe versus North America or America as a whole, and what do you do with those constraints?
That's a great question. First, I did want to say, based on the comment you said at the beginning, one of the things that has really helped us, by the way, find these unicorns or these folks that have those soft skills is the fact that the industry itself has just become so much more diverse and inclusive than what it was when I was making games 20 years ago. It's amazing now, the opportunities that we have to work with creators from very different backgrounds, from different places of the world, and just, I'm really, really happy about that. And I would invite anyone listening who who is excited about this stuff to get involved, because the ability to make a game in your own bedroom on a computer and find everything you need to learn on YouTube is insane. It's all free and it's amazing. And like, you know, I wish that I'd had those things 20 years ago, but you have them today. And I would highly recommend that that you look into that. Okay. So your question about the internet, basically it sucks. It's, you know, I said this at the beginning, but the challenges that we faced making multiplayer games 20 years ago that I thought for sure would be gone and fixed by now are not fixed. In a lot of cases, the ping, the latency of connections between players that I'm having to deal with is the same as what I had to deal with 20 years ago, you know, especially if we're trying to connect players across transcontinental links, you know, between different countries. So what I would say is, and I see this happen all the time, multiplayer developers will take for granted the network conditions that they think their players are going to experience. And, you know, this happens because they're playing locally on their LAN and they're not experiencing that during development, or even because they have a small set of play testers and they're all in the same region or close to them. And then as soon as their game goes live, everything falls apart. And it's like, what happened? You know, and there's just such a crucial difference between a player at a 20 ping and a player at 120 ping, and taking for granted that your players are just all going to be, you know, sub 50 millisecond ping. That's just not the case. And especially not the case if you want to target lower end devices and you really want to have the broad appeal of something like Fortnite or Minecraft that's on every device out there. You're going to experience every network condition that exists, and your game needs to gracefully handle those things. So my recommendation, and I think this was mentioned on the last talk, is there are all these wonderful tools out there for simulating crappy internet. You just need to have those tools running from the very beginning, and you need to verify your assumptions. Like, this gets back to what we were saying earlier about design. If your design is absolutely hinges on, you know, a player is aiming at another player and it's precision aiming, and they need to see exactly where their crosshair is over that other player, and they shoot and they can hit that other player. Great. Now test that on 150 millisecond ping with 10% or 5% packet loss and jitter. And if it doesn't work, then you have two choices. You can either go back to the drawing board with your design and say, is there a way for us to get the same gameplay experience we want without requiring this level of precision? The second choice is diving really deep into the various network solutions that are out there. Many of them now have been well developed. They're documented. There's white papers, there's network engines like what these guys, like what the Photon guys provide, that solve for this. And you have to educate yourself about how those work and what the trade-offs are, because none of it is automatic. And the fact is that the limitations of physics, you know, just like the speed of light, are never going to change. And you know, as we talked about earlier, player perception and balancing player perception against the limitations of just the physics of it is always going to be something you have to deal with. And so the thing to do is to get those things out of the way early. Like, test as soon as you have a game running on the network, throw one of these, you know, network latency simulators at it and see what happens. And especially if you are intending to allow players from different regions to play together. In our case, in almost every game that we've ever made, except for Words with Friends, although that game is language based, so it's easier, but we tend to aggregate players by region. What we found is that actually there's other problems that show up immediately when you start letting players from different locations play with each other, whether it's time zone differences, language differences. There's just all sorts of things that you have to deal with. And if your game can be successful with enough players playing in just one region at a time together, then that's obviously the easier answer, because latency is going to be lower amongst players in those groups. And so we tend to try to split out that when we can. And when we can't, we try to work around those things. We try to like get rid of chat so that it's, you know, and just assume very high latencies and things like that. So yeah, that's been our approach.
Yeah, definitely. And for the viewers, like the brain itself, when it sees something, like the time it takes to compute is between 12 and 80 milliseconds, right? So if you target something that is 25 milliseconds, it's already like so damn fast, right? And
Yes.
so so if you said to yourself, okay, let's aim for that 80 milliseconds, already like it's very good. And if you go into 60, obviously it's very, very awesome. And so yeah, so we have a few questions from
Yeah.
our viewers. So
Definitely.
the first one is from Dan Glazar, which is, what first step would you suggest to someone who, with no previous knowledge, wants to learn about multiplayer network systems?
Well, these days I would suggest to get onto the Photon Exit Games Discord and join the communication there. That's where I spend so much of my time right now, because we're working on a multiplayer game with these guys, and there's just so much help there, and it's a great community. But actually, there's several of these communities. So I've been on the Mirror Discord. There's a ton of people there now. Unity bought the ML API guys. They have a Discord that's really great, and these communities are very helpful, and they're full of the same people that are dealing with these challenges. And even from they're full of a lot of beginners actually also, and people who are just asking that question: how do I get started? What do I, and so I recommend that. And then I'd recommend YouTube. There are just phenomenal channels of people saying, let's build a multiplayer game from scratch. Here's something I would recommend to everyone, which is, before you go make your magnum opus, your brand new original game that you came up with, if you're a beginner, just go copy someone else's game. Go do someone's tutorial. Go through the process, a couple hours or even a couple days of, let's build the same multiplayer game that this YouTuber guy built or this tutorial built. You will learn so much by even just typing in the same things that they typed in. You wouldn't think that, but it really does. So I recommend starting there and then jump into the community, and we'll all help you out.
That's fantastic, Paul. And to finish out for you, I would say, what are you working on? How can people get in touch with you? And obviously, it would be amazing for other developers to join your team. So I will let you tell a bit more about
Yeah.
what is up with your current work and status.
Thank you, Mark. So our studio is called Playful. We are a fully remote studio right now. I'm actually on the mountain in Utah right now. We normally live in Dallas, Texas, but we are everywhere now. Our developers are spread out. So anyone can get in contact with us. We'd love to talk to you. The vision, the missions of our studio is to change the world, to make the world a more delightful place, one video game at a time. So, we really believe in the power of video games to bring joy and connection to people. I will say too that multiplayer is such an incredible thing for this. When I was first joined Zynga with Words of Friends, when we sold that game to them, I remember I was in this conference and somebody asked me, like, why is Words of Friends so popular? What is it about the game that's so popular? Like, is it the fact that you change the board? Is it the fact that the art is a certain way? And I thought about it for a second. I was like, people don't love Words of Friends. People love each other. Words of Friends is just an excuse to get together with others. And this is the amazing thing about building a multiplayer game is, when you're building a single player game, you have to focus and worry so much about, do my players love this game design? Do they love these characters? When you're building a multiplayer game, you inherently have this level of engagement, of player engagement, that is based on the fact that they're just engaging with others. So the more that you can make that an amazing thing. Anyway, that's what we believe in. You can reach us at contactus@playfulstudios.com, and we'd love to hear from you. We're going to be launching our own Discord soon. So look forward to that. We'll send out a press release and more information about that. We're doing that in conjunction with the launch of our new product, which I mentioned is top secret right now, but we're really excited to tell people about it soon. And I think that all of our fans and players are going to be excited about it also. So look forward to what's next from us. And we even have something for this holidays coming out that we'll be talking about very soon. So anyway, thank you very much for having me also, Mark. It's my pleasure.
Oh, it was great to have you, definitely, Paul. And so check out his website, and also don't hesitate to write him an email.
Playfulstudios.com is a really great place to start.
And then obviously the multiplayer games has a bright future in front of us. We're all augmented by our phones and by VR and soon by augmented reality. So games will always be around us because it's all about having fun. So thank you so much again, Paul, for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark.
And now I see Sophia, so I will give you back the stage. And
Thank you.
thank you for being with us as well today.
Oh, well, no, thank you. And thank you, Mark, for leading us through this mastering multiplayer. And thank you to Photon for sponsoring.